climate catastrophes, as you were just bringing up, you know, yeah, if there was a big cataclysmic event that would have wiped out all of the tech that they did have, that these civilizations had, to reel us back into primitive times, because that's really ultimately what they did, right? I mean, if there was that level of tech and then it was suddenly gone, or maybe not suddenly, but gone, um, then we would have become more primitive again, in a way, like somewhat primitive. So let's talk about climate change and the
Let's do
narratives
it.
right now around climate change. So when I was a kid growing up,
Mhm.
they told us that an ice age was coming, that we were all going to be like living amongst the polar bears.
Right.
And I remember thinking, "Oh, that sounds miserable." Like, I don't even know if my first thought was, "How are we gonna survive, if it's freezing?" Then my second thought was, "Would we want to survive if it's freezing? That sounds miserable. I wanna live in a tropical place." Um, but now, of course, fast forward a couple of decades, and only a couple of decades fast forward, and then they say, "Oh, no, it's not the ice age coming, it's global warming coming." But
Mhm.
the Earth has been around, and then there's this whole narrative of it's gonna destroy we're destroying the planet, and which makes zero sense. It seems like the planet's been here for a long time, probably will be here for a long time after us. You've been looking into this, and you go obviously way deep into history when you do your research. So, what are we in right now? Are we warming or are we cooling?
So this is a wild topic, and so a lot of people might not be aware that approximately a year ago, Elon Musk was on the Full Send podcast with the Nelk Boys, and something he said caught my attention. Where they were talking about in the context of human civilizations dying from a catastrophe, and he said that ice ages are, quote, a deep, deep rabbit hole, and then he went on to say it again, a deep rabbit hole. And so this is something that I basically went down that rabbit hole, and I was astonished at what I came across, and lots of data that is not being included into the conversation involving man-made climate change. So to answer your question, when the scientists said decades ago that we were going to freeze, they were actually correct, but they were early. So there's something called, and I could bring up the graphs if people
Yeah.
want to see. So like, I'm not pulling this from Bob's website. This is mainstream science. So it's on the data on the climate data slides. Let's see. It's not showing. You just have to click on it.
Oh, I can't. I think it's gone. Is it this other one?
The climate. To say climate
Okay,
data.
this one?
This one. So I'm going to
Okay.
skip forward a few slides. We'll come back to what this gentleman had said. Give me a half a second. This will all be good stuff to talk about. I had this in the certain order. Okay, so glacials and interglacials. So what people need to understand is that we are in the middle of an ice age right now that started 3 million years ago. I'm quoting Utah Geological Survey. It shows up at the top of Google. It's prestigious. All this
How
stuff
old
is supported. What's
how old
that?
is the Earth to start? Like, how how long has the
They
Earth been
say
around?
4.5 billion years. Listen,
Okay.
I'm not some new Earth, young Earth creationist guy, but like when they throw these billions and billions of years, I honestly don't necessarily think they could say that with an absolute fact. But I'm not here to deny it. I don't
Mhm.
really old. I'll get on with that. But so
So
okay,
3,000,000, okay, so let's say the world is 4,000,000,000 years old. So three
Mhm.
million years ago, an ice age starts.
Correct.
Okay.
And so over the last 11,000 years, we've been in a period of warming. And so this is something that people need to really understand is that there's something called glacials and
Mhm.
interglacials. Glacials are periods of cooling where there's an abundance of growing glaciers throughout the hemisphere. And then during periods of warming, interglacials is that the data shows that over the last 450,000 years, there's been four, arguably five periods of warming, interglacial periods. And and so
Oh.
this is where things get wild. And this is probably a little too small for people to see, but I already know what it says. Is that, like I just said, our interglacial that we're in now, right now, where it's
Mhm.
warm and our glaciers are going away, started 11,000 years ago. But what's interesting is that the periods of warming last several thousand years, whereas the periods of cooling last tens of thousands of years. So
Oh,
historically, 7 to 9 times longer.
yeah.
Let me just say that again. Glacials last 7 to 9 times longer than interglacials. So, and by the way, the reason why they know this is through ice core data that was taken from Greenland as well as Antarctica. So when Elon Musk was talking about ice ages are a deep, deep rabbit hole, I figured out what he meant is that no matter what we do here on planet Earth, the Earth is going to freeze. So a few
Well, I mean,
decades,
just looking at this, it looks like so this is 450,000 years worth of data?
yes, and the peaks, the areas that you see where like at the peaks are periods of warming. So
Warming, right.
if you look at the gaps between the peaks, you can see that they're significantly further apart. That the periods of warming are rather brief in comparison. Again,
Sure.
they last several thousand years of warming and then tens of thousands of years of cooling.
Cooling.
So the
But if you look at the low point of the cooling, it's getting colder and colder each time. I mean, this is it's
yeah,
the line is going down actually.
mhm,
Like even right now where we are today, the warming, we're not nearly as warm as it was the last time it warmed yet.
correct. And so this is what I think. I think that the scientists a few decades ago were correct, but they were wrong by being early in that they understood the data to show that, oh, okay, Earth is cold more often than it's hot. Let me
Yeah.
also say this. I was on the Joe Rogan podcast approximately a year ago where I did say my exact words where I think that the data indicates that the Earth is cold more often than it's hot. And then Media Matters, funded by George Soros, did
Yeah.
a hit piece on me for this, saying that I was contradicting mainstream science. I responded to them with various sources right out of scientific journals, and they didn't include it in their article. And where I was wrong is that I said the data might indicate. No, no, no. The data absolutely definitively indicates that the Earth is indeed cold more often than it's hot.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
it sounds like every both are right, kind of, right? So
yes, I would agree
there
with
is
that.
an overall cooling effect happening. I mean, just again, looking at this graph, looking at the bottom points, we see that they're getting lower and lower and lower as time has gone on in 450,000 years.
Yes,
And but at the same time, we are currently in a trajectory of going up. So we are currently in a warming period,
yes,
but then yeah, it's going to eventually maybe cool and head again towards an ice age. But these things do seem to take thousands of years. I mean, they take
absolutely.
thousands of years, right? So we're not going to be alive to see the cooling part of this.
So here's the thing. So honestly, we don't know that for sure. When it's going to happen, it could happen in our lifetime. It could happen 1,000 years from now, a few hundred years from now, a few
Right,
thousand
okay.
years from
Right.
now.
Right, we could be at the very peak right now. And
Right.
then suddenly we start cooling.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
that's one reason why I think that we are on the brink of it. I don't know this. Like, I don't want to be a Mr. Doomsday guy. To anyone listening, I do not know when this is going to happen. And
Yeah.
nobody actually does. What the data shows, though, again, since we're in a period of warming that started 11,000 years ago, and
Mhm.
the fact that these periods of warming last several thousand years, it would indicate that perhaps we're on the tail end of the warming. How much longer is the warming going to last before it starts cooling? I don't think anyone can say with any bit of absolute certainty. But I will say is that there's other factors that are at play involving the Earth in the cosmos that
Mhm.
play a factor on climate change. So let me just say that these factors that you're looking at here, because people might ask, like, okay, well, what's causing this? And this is where things get wild, is that it involves the Earth's precessional cycle. So let me scroll back a number of slides here. So a lot of people are actually astonished to learn that the Sahara Desert was a lush green tropical paradise up until
Wow.
5,000 years ago. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
See,
I did not know
I'm
that.
happy to hear that because some people know, but a lot of people, they hear this for the first time, like, oh, I didn't know that.
Well, I will
So,
say, I've always wondered why any civilization ever settled there.
right,
Like, why
yeah,
would you choose that area? But I guess if people were already there because it was a nice area at one point, and then it kind of, then that makes more sense. Otherwise, I don't know why anybody would migrate there.
so listen to this. The Sahara, up until 5,000 years ago, had one of the largest networks of rivers ever known to exist. And it also had the largest freshwater lake ever known to exist on Earth, which was Mega Lake Chad. It's literally like double all the North American Great Lakes combined,
Wow.
of surface area, I should say. And what's interesting is that something happened to create it to change in a flash. And let me just say this, because a lot of the conversation that we're looking at now involving climate change in the context of humans is the rate of change. And
Mhm.
I'm going to argue that it's actually not possible for us to definitively say to what level we are creating the rate of change involving other natural forces. Because here's where things get nuts, is that you'll have different scientific studies that will say that it shifted from green to a desert 5,000 years ago. Some will
Mhm.
say 6,000 years ago. Others will say like the Smithsonian, 8,000 to 4,500 years ago. Some will say 10,000 years ago. Others will say 11,000 years ago. So here's where I'm going with this, is that if modern scientists today can only ballpark it over a period of 5 to 6,000 years, where some other scientists, let me find, okay, so here's another scientist out of a university that said that it may have been so abrupt that it took only 1 century for the grassy hills and valley lakes to become stark dunes as they are today. So the reason why this is so significant is that, and they believe that this involves the Earth's precessional cycle, that the Earth changes on a wobble. It's the reason
Mhm.
why we have a North Star, which is Polaris today. But in the past, it was Vega, and in the future, it will be Vega again. So it basically means that the portion of the northern hemisphere is going to face away from the sun, and that's related. That's why they say that the Sahara changed. Is that it was once far more green, and then as the tilt slowly happened, it's changed over time. That it created this vast change on Earth. And so here's the point that I want to make: is that if they can't definitively say whether it's over a course of 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,000 years or 100 years, how can they say with any bit of certainty to what level rate of change is happening today? Because
Right.
they need to be able to articulate that. And when you realize that there's these other cycles happening involving the Earth's tilt, which we know is 23.4 degrees today, well, it used to be 22.1. And then it's going to, and it also was 24.5. We also know, and this is a big factor, is that the eccentricity, let me just scroll over. And if you need me to stop, I mean, if you put me on a soapbox, Kim, I won't stop. But I want people to see this because these are things that
Yeah.
most people have never heard of before, is that there are cycles involving which called Milankovitch cycles, which have 3 variables to them. One is eccentricity, which is involving the Earth's elliptical orbit around the sun. So right
Mhm.
now we're at a near circular orbit, but over periods of time ranging over 100,000 of years, it has a much further orbit away from the sun, but it's constantly changing every single day. Um, Obviously immeasurable by day, but over long periods of time, it does change. But also the Earth's precessional cycle, which I was just discussing in the context of the Green Sahara, changes over a period of 19 to 26,000 years. This one says 24,000 years, but I have other sources that say 26,000 years. But you also have the tilt, which I just described, of changing as well. All 3 of these variables are changing all day, every day, and
Yeah.
they do impact ice ages on Earth. So the reality here is that to what amount is the rate of change being influenced by all these variables, and why am I not hearing about them in the context of climate change? Why am I hearing nothing about interglacials and glacial periods? I mean, why am I hearing nothing about the Green Sahara? Like, these are all significant factors that the human brain can wrap their head around, but I don't hear them whatsoever in the context of modern day climate change. And while I'm at it, if you have a question, let me know. But
Well,
there's
one question is
yes.
that this was a green Sahara during the time of the Egyptian, but the pyramids, that's what you're saying.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting. So if there was, but okay, it doesn't make sense to me for it to have been a slow change of like, oh, the Earth shifted its axis a bit, and that's what caused it. I mean, it seems like in 5,000 years to go from something that green to something that dry,
Mhm.
uh, I mean, it seems like it would have been a lot faster, like something like like volcanic activity would have been.
Right.
And that's the thing about the climate change discussion is that a volcano alone, I think, causes more CO2 in the air, right? Is that am I right on that? That's like a bigger cataclysmic event than like anything we could than any farming that we're doing because they're like, "Oh, you're farming and now you're causing." Oh, forget about all the private jets, by the way, that fly to Davos. Like, we're not going to be talking about the private jet carbon emission. Instead, you have to stop farming and stop eating food, stop
So
breathing, stop living.
there's a
Um,
notable doctor out of Australia named Dr. Ian Plimmer, who has gone on to provide the data which shows that 97% of all CO2 and greenhouse gases that are created on Earth come naturally, whether it's volcanoes and particularly seafloor vents at the bottom of
y-
the ocean, they're constantly
right.
releasing, whereas humans are only producing 3% of the CO2 emissions that are happening today. And what's interesting is that he went on to say that if they can't articulate that other 97% isn't affecting our environment, then it's essentially, in his own words, game over for their narrative. Because it's like,
Right.
sure, we're producing CO2, but I want to remind people that CO2 is plant food. In fact, the periods of, like, say, the time of the dinosaurs, to put this in context, that as of today, we're at approximately 420 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. But in the height of the dinosaurs, it was 6,000 parts per million, which is 1,328% higher. But that was the largest animals and most abundance of vegetation ever known in Earth's history. And the reality is that CO2 is actually plant food. And to put this into perspective,
Mhm.
that modern greenhouses literally pump CO2 into them all day long, and it creates as much as a 30% higher yield. I don't hear this at all in the context of CO2. It's like they making CO2 out to be the devil.
Right.
But just like we saw with COVID and all these experts coming out and shunning other people, whether it's Dr. Robert W. Malone, who had the patents
Right.
on the mRNA technology, whether it's Dr. Peter McCullough, who is the most published doctor in American history, whether it's Nobel Prize laureate Luc Montagnier, the late Montagnier, I never say his name correctly, but he's a Frenchman, who received the Nobel Prize for discovering AIDS, came out to say all these warnings about the narrative. Let's just say
Right.
these people were shunned, censored, and even deplatformed. And so when I
Oh.
see other people like Nobel Prize laureate Dr. John Clauser, who won the Nobel Prize in 2022, and he's since been has speaking out as of November of last year, saying that this climate narrative is not factual. He's basically saying that it's a scam to change the global economic situation. So where I'm going with this is that I might not be Mr. Expert, but what I do is my research on what the experts are saying. And when these people are being omitted from the conversation, it makes me have questions.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's for sure. Anytime they censor, then it's like, "Oh, okay, what are you hiding? What is it that we're not supposed to know?" Right? That's
Right.
that's that's kind of where I go with that right now. Yeah, I don't remember what I was watching, but maybe it was several months ago, and I was watching something about volcanic activity and how that, like we could do all of these various things to try to stop climate change, but one volcano eruption and it's like erased completely.
So
Anything that we try to do.
so that's science, because in approximately 72,000 years ago, there was something called the Toba super eruption. And what's interesting about that, so it was like, I don't know if it made Yellowstone pale in comparison, but whatever it was this super volcano. Its eruption was devastating to Earth, and the fossil record shows that the human species may have been reduced to just a few thousand people at that same exact period of time. And a lot of people would say that, well, that's a correlation. It's like that, a super volcano can wipe out Earth, animal species on Earth, including us.
Yeah.
And so I find that interesting as well.
Yeah, well, I keep hearing that if Yellowstone blows, like, North America is in big trouble.
Yeah, I'm not. So I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm not too worried about Yellowstone. For some reason, I'm just not too worried about it.
You think
Maybe
the
I'm just
dinosaurs weren't worried either? You think those ancient Egyptians building those pyramids weren't worried?
They were deniers, so they had what was coming. If they had paid their carbon tax, maybe the effects would have been alleviated. Imagine how
Yeah.
much worse it would have been, Kim, if that the pharaohs didn't collect from the from the from the
Seriously.
proletariat.
Hey guys, be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you like this segment. Now, you might be wondering, this seems like it's part of a bigger show. You're right, it is. The full show is at KimIversonShow.com. So, what you're watching is just a clip. And if you want to get the full experience, then you got to go to KimIversonShow.com. The show airs Monday through Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That is where you can watch the full show. Here, you just get clips. So, click on the link down below, go to the full show, enjoy. Otherwise, I'll see you next time right here. And be sure, once again, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.